Now, it's been a long time since I responded to a quote-unquote news article, but after seeing this one, I just had to shake my head and wonder what the hell is wrong with these people. This was written on the website Aeon by Howard Rachlin and Marvin Frankel, two people who clearly don't have a goddamn clue, and they've had their heads polluted, or more likely are the ones polluting the minds of young regressives. Because only the regressive mindset could come up with this kind of stupid bullshit. The article's called, "If Babies Were Randomly Allocated to Families, Would Racism End?" And my answer is hell no. Rachlin and Frankel suggest a world where babies are taken away from their birth parents and randomly given out to other women who just so happen to be at the hospital at the same time. It's not wealth redistribution, it's child redistribution. So these babies, some of which are black and some of which are white, some of which are male and some of which are female, some of which are healthy and some of which are not, women would be forced, and you can only do this by force, but women would be forced to walk away with children that are not their own in some grand social experiment. And they admit this is something that could never happen in the real world, and that's true, because nobody in their right mind would ever suggest doing anything like this. Oh wait, these people are suggesting it, even if they're sure it would never happen. Because just suggesting it, even as a thought experiment, is so utterly abhorrent to anybody with any morals whatsoever that it kind of makes me question how the regressive left manages to get through the day. The whole idea that this is genetic chauvinism is absurd. It's a biological necessity. The whole point of evolution is to pass along your own genes and the genes of your children and grandchildren. The most successful genes, the ones that get passed along the most and survive, ensure the survival of the species in its most fit form. Now, I'll be the first one to say, I think modern society has subverted biology. We allow people to survive who are clearly biologically inferior. We allow people to reproduce who are genetically damaged, such that said damage becomes part of what the human species is. It does nothing to help our strength as a species. They say that one effect of social mixing is to generate a strong interest in the health and well-being of expectant mothers. That's bullshit. It would actually do exactly the opposite. Expectant mothers, because they know that the child they end up with will not be their own, would feel no compunction whatsoever to take care of themselves or their fetus during pregnancy. They would drink and smoke and do drugs. They would take risks and not take any of the steps to ensure a healthy pregnancy because they wouldn't give a damn about having a healthy pregnancy. In fact, I would argue that voluntary prenatal care would largely vanish. I mean, what's the point? If your own efforts don't guarantee you anything, why would you bother? You could be the healthiest woman in the world and still get saddled with an unhealthy, damaged child. So long as your outcome is not based on your choices and actions, what's the point? Of course, this is all leading toward a hyper-authoritarian, government-forced healthy lifestyle, I'm sure, where the people rely on the government to make sure that everybody eats the right foods and does away with vices because women are just turned into breeders with no rights of their own. And then they say that racism will just go away. No, it won't. It just won't. A racist couple that gets a baby of a different race is not going to take care of that baby. So you get white couples that are killing black babies and black couples that are killing white babies. It isn't going to change their minds any. And because these couples are not emotionally invested in their adopted children, the standard of care across the board is going to go down. I mean, we can look at how things are today. For some people, their children just don't matter. They were an unfortunate side effect of having sex, or they were a necessary evil to keep the father around paying the bills. Now, expand that to virtually all women who will feel little, if any, need to care for their kids because they're not their kids. These idiots call it genetic chauvinism. I call it reality. Then they go on to say that randomizing babies will give them a random chance at financial success. but it will also give a random chance of financial failure. So long as poverty exists, some children will be born into it, and some will not. Just mixing the chances up doesn't change the fact. If 50% of children are above the financial median, 50% will be below it. And it doesn't really matter which children fit in where. You haven't actually solved the problem. And they argue that maybe the child of Bill Gates, now forced to live with a barber, might somehow rise above his station because the Gates genes are strong. In other words, white people genes are better than non-white people genes, which is ridiculous. But if that's the case, are we going to assume that the bad genes of, say, the black child of some crack whore that gets placed with the Gates family can just squander the entire family fortune on pussy and blow? This is just a means of forced mediocrity, which is exactly what regressives want. Then they move on to completely ignore the biological necessities of evolution, saying that your attraction to your own biological children is irrelevant. We can just forcibly replace that through authoritarian, totalitarian rule. They bring up how adoptive parents operate, neglecting that adoption is a choice, and under this suggested system, it would no longer be optional. Now, I certainly respect and admire adoptive parents, but not everybody wants to do that. And besides, under this new forced redistribution model, in order to get a child, don't you have to have a child first? Lots of adoptive parents have no children of their own, either through choice or inability. So, would these people who don't have their own children not be allowed to adopt? How's that going to be handled? In fact, there's a lot of questions I bet our psychologists here have never asked themselves. I would wager that, given the fact that you would never get your own child, and know that you would never get your own child, lots of breeding would go underground. Parents would never go to a hospital where their child would be taken from them. They'll just have it at home and keep the existence of their child a secret. For those that don't want to do that, I'd wager that abortion would grow significantly as women not wanting to give up their children and couples not wanting to raise children of others simply would never bring a pregnancy to term. If you don't give a baby to the system cannot force you to take another baby home. And besides, what do you do with people who just refuse to take part? Do you take their babies at gunpoint in some Orwellian nightmare? Who the hell would want to live in such a world? Oh, right, regressives! Rechtlin and Frankel even acknowledge these objections and say that these babies would have no birth certificates and couldn't vote, hence creating a caste system. And we've all seen how well the caste system works in India, haven't we? They suggest that few parents would be willing to take such penalties. But I suggest that these idiots have no idea how humanity actually operates. But then again, these are regressives that exist in their own fantasy world, wholly unaware of how reality works. Finally, they suggest that unwitting incest might happen between people who have no idea that they're actually related, saying that we'd have to genetically test every prospective couple to make sure they weren't too closely genetically related. This seems to be adding unnecessary complexity for no demonstrable benefit. But then again, this is totalitarianism riding in on a dark horse. The government now gets to tell you who you can marry and who you can't. And what happens for those who just don't get married, which these days is a significant percentage? Does the government get to tell you who you can sleep with and who you can't? Do you have to petition the government before you have a one-night stand? The whole thing is clearly an unthought out mess. We're talking about people who don't understand humanity. They view reality through the lens of their absurd ideology. And where reality disagrees, they demand reality's wrong. And they do it over and over and over again. Maybe reality isn't the best way to do things. Well, too fucking bad. And if you watch how regressives do things, you see this exact pattern. They don't care how things actually work. They only care how they wish things worked. And in that, they're exactly like delusional theists. And I love how at the end, they say that if we're not willing to accept this monstrosity, we should ask why we're more willing to cling to nature than we are to social cohesion. And this coming from people who push multiculturalism and race-based safe spaces. These people don't know what social cohesion is. Social cohesion comes when most people believe things in common, when people are not segregated, when people are not split up by imaginary identities. What the regressive left pushes is not cohesion. It pushes social disintegration. Why they're so blinded by their ideology, I will never know. But this was just one more example of their ridiculous stupidity.